So in the second part of today's lecture, we're going to look at nutrient cycles. And shown here is a generic nutrient cycle showing that nutrients are taken up by plants, then used in growth, then decomposing happens and they break down and they go back into the soil. They're reabsorbed by plants and so on. And this is kind of a generic nutrient cycle, but we want to think about what are the macronutrients and the micronutrients that organisms need. And we'll start with the basic ones that plants need. So if we have nutrient problems, we see things like this algal bloom pictured here. And that will come from an imbalance in the nutrients in the environment. But a balance of the proper nutrients can create a very healthy environment for plant growth and for other organisms. And these are the three major nutrients, N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So if we look at this molecule, this is the simplest molecule that has nitrogen in it in the human body. That is one of the building blocks of the human body, or of just about any organism. And you're probably going to fixate on this letter R here and try to think about which element is illustrated by R. That's not an element, that's considered a side chain that would be made up of a different molecule attached there. But we're concerned about the N here and trying to figure out what type of molecule is this. So this molecule is an amino acid. And amino acids have a side chain here that's abbreviated with the R, but this H3N plus is a key part, and that's why plants need nitrogen, is to be able to build amino acids. There are many forms of nitrogen, and some are harder for organisms to use than others. So N2 gas, for example, is hard for most plants to use, although some have symbiotic relationships that allow them to use it. NO3 minus and NH3 are more easily used by plants. They use them to build amino acids, and amino acids make proteins. So simply put, without nitrogen, plants have an inefficiency or a disability as far as producing proteins. Now we can look at the molecule in which phosphate or phosphorus plays a major role. And there are a couple different things, but this is really the most important one as far as an organism and its energy. So you see three phosphate groups here. So think of an organism that has triphosphate in its name, and hopefully you came up with ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So this is where plants will use the energy in sugars, and they will break them down and store the energy from those bonds in the energy of the bonds of the ATP. And plants and animals and all sorts of organisms do this. They use ATP as a temporary energy form that their cells can use. Now, one of the big problems with phosphorus is that it can cause algal blooms like the one pictured here in Lake Erie in late summer. So this is that famous cyanobacteria that we learned about in earlier lectures, or blue-green algae. And remember that really nothing eats it, so it becomes essentially a toxic algal bloom and grows to the point where they will exhaust all the resources, they die, and then when they die and decompose, it takes all of the oxygen out of the water, and so the water becomes devoid of oxygen and it can lead to fish kills. It's a very big problem, and it comes from agricultural runoff of phosphorus. So we get phosphorus coming into the lake, and that phosphorus is a limiting element for cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria have the special ability to take nitrogen out of the atmosphere, out of N2, and fix it. So they're not limited by the amount of nitrogen available in the water. They take nitrogen that's dissolved in the N2 form in the water and not in nitrate or ammonia forms. And so they escape nitrogen limitation, but they're usually phosphate limited. And when you have an excess of phosphate in an ecosystem, you get blue-green algal blooms. The next major nutrient is potassium. And potassium is an interesting one because we don't really know, you don't think a ton about potassium. But if your body gets a potassium imbalance, something in particular happens. And this happens a lot to athletes. Okay? And Gatorade, for example, is rich in potassium. And Gatorade being rich in potassium allows body to replenish that potassium and fight off the big problem of cramps. Now, plants use potassium in a similar way. Potassium in our body primes an ion channel that allows muscles to expand and contract. And plants use it for water balance. They use it to move water around in their tissues. So potassium is really important for plants as far as water balance in their different tissues. Then you can see some of the other nutrients here: iron and sulfur, magnesium and calcium, and what those are used for. But the ones we're going to focus on for this class are N, P, and K.